that's when I went through what I call the great life awakeners. You know, I went through a stage 3 cancer. I went through a multi-million-dollar business bankruptcy, and then I went through a divorce, you know. And so I went through those, you know, one year after the other. So this is, in my opinion, something that moved me into the proverbial dark night of the soul, right? And essentially life was sort of dragging me through a rebirth. You know, it wasn't really giving me much of an option. And when I was sort of in that space trying to get back on top, figure this thing out, life just was no longer responding to my discipline. And I was very shocked by that because it always responded to tenacity and discipline and will and structure. And it wasn't until I went to the University of Santa Monica that I really began to understand that. And at the University of Santa Monica, they had a program back then to obtain a master's degree in spiritual psychology. And I knew about psychology. I didn't know about spiritual psychology. And I think for the audience to kind of understand this, like psyche means soul. Ology is the study of. So technically, psychology should be the study of the soul. But when you look at the definition of psychology in the Western world, it is the study of science and mind and behavior. So they strip the soul out of it, like they do a lot of things. And so what spiritual psychology does, it reintegrates the soul into the psychology to truly get a deeper understanding of the deeper significance of your behaviors. Because as we all pretty much get a sense of, we are a soul and a body. We're both. And if we don't have any sort of frameworks to assist the soul and understand it, then we're pretty much lost in this world. And so when I went into spiritual psychology and I heard those words like your outer experience will be a reflection of your inner reality. And it was literally like a tuning fork, because as soon as I heard that sequence in that sense, I was like, okay, I get it. My inner world, because I have not healed, is a disaster right now. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm not worthy of these great heights anymore. I mean, I felt down in the depths of the ocean floor. I mean, very, very dark. And when I heard that, I was like, the world is responding to my internal world. That's why I can no longer gain momentum. That's why the discipline is no longer working. And so then that's when I really started to go deep into the underworld, or the other world, my inner world. And once I started to understand, you know, this entire sort of psychological framework, I was like, oh my gosh, like the moment that I started to address my pain and my trauma, like I started to elevate, you know, and it felt organic in the expansion. It didn't feel like I was forcing stuff. It just felt like I took care of a trauma, boom, the external world then started to move. And so then as I continued that walk, I really started to understand that business is really a game of consciousness, you know, and the more that I continued to integrate my unconscious, you know, which really means to integrate your shadow. Most people don't even realize that there is a shadow. And if you don't even realize that you have a shadow, then it's that dark, okay? Because we have both sides of ourselves. Right? Carl Jung has this really famous quote. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Right?
I have a question on the shadow.
Yeah.
I have studied a little bit of Carl Jung, and they did talk about people being scared of the shadow, because in the shadow, you might be feeling things like things that the society actually represses. For example, like you may actually have like a dark emotion, like I'm thinking of something like you may actually want to hurt someone because of anger, fear, but if you actually speak that out loud, someone's going to look down upon you. So we repress those feelings, like, no, you shouldn't be feeling like that, or you shouldn't be feeling like that towards your friend because you're envy towards him, or you shouldn't be feeling like this towards your brother. But how could you help? How could we help actually even? How could you get someone to overcome that fear of the shadow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in our world, we've been programmed to sort of believe that the dark is evil, you know? And the reality is the shadow does not mean evil. It just means an unintegrated part of our psyche. you know. And so the way that I typically guide entrepreneurs in this rebirth is ultimately to look at everything that irritates you. Whatever creates a discomfort in you is typically where you'll find a shadow, you know. And so when you're looking out into your clients, your partners, your wife, your children, whatever pisses you off is the clue, right? Because if it pisses you off, you're judging that as wrong or right, right? And the reality is there should be no judgment about that. It should be an observation about it. But if you're judging it, it's triggering something. So you at some point laid out a program or a pattern or, you know, a trauma that occurred. The way that I really describe it is this, is that everybody, especially in the New Age community, always wants to kill the ego, as an example. The ego is your booster rocket, okay? The ego is a gift from God, and essentially gives it to us on the way in and says, hey, this is going to help you, right? And so when we come in, the traumas that we receive, the ego then comes in to protect, right? Because you don't have a defense system, right? And so it comes in and it wraps that trauma and it winds around it, and that creates a wound, right? So now that trauma is there, and then the shadow patterns end up coming from there. The tendencies end up coming as those really come as a trauma from, you know, the trauma, then the shadow patterns come as a result of that, right? And so what you're looking at doing is the stuff that irritates you typically is going to lead back into those trauma areas, right? And so what you're doing ultimately, and the reason I say that it's a booster rocket, is that when you go back into those traumas and you reconcile them, meaning that you start to bring that higher level of perspective, then what happens is those wounds will turn into your wisdom. That is the source of where your wisdom will be coming from, a lot of it, right? And then when you untangle the ego, you reassign a job to the ego, and its real job is to establish connection with the divine. That's its real function. But at the lower levels, it's a protective mechanism to keep us safe in an errant world, in a world that's pretty trauma-based, right? But once you untangle it, you literally reassigns it. And just in the same way that for most people, it keeps them, like the shadow and the ego is like, hey, you can't do that, you're dumb, blah, 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 right? All of that negative self-critical talk, at some point, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to say, hey, you got a divine mission, get up, we got to go. There's a lot to do. It starts to be an ally versus a foe.
That's a very interesting perspective, because the ego, most people, like you're saying, it is good. Like when you need to go into battle, you need that ego.
You need that.
Yeah.
But what about when you need to be vulnerable, and especially as a man, when our egos don't let us be vulnerable, especially even in the Latino community, you got a lot of machismo, like where, to be a little bit vulnerable myself, my family, like we don't ever tell each other we love you.
Sure.
Because it's just, and that's very common in our culture. And I know all my cousins are for the most part like that, like where we don't speak that language because of our ego.
Right. Well, and I think the machismo is that the people are macho because they haven't fucking gone to hell. Go to hell.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna be very macho at that point.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I love that I really learned through this, and talk a little bit about, you have to go through hell, you have to go through darkness in order to get to the light. I think that's one that just really it landed for me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, especially in the Latino community, we have to go to hell. We have to go through that darkness.
Yeah.
To really rebirth again.
Yeah.
You know?
It's in the darkness that you'll find the light, right? From the Big Bang came the light.
Yeah. That's where the light shines the brightest.
Yeah, exactly. And so what Pablo's referring to is a metaphor that I like to use a lot, and it's really about the story of Jesus, Yeshua, right? And for me, that to me, the New Testament is a template. It's a template. So if you're listening, listen closely. This is a template of how you break out of the matrix. How do you break out of the world of duality, right? And in order to do that, you simply got to follow sort of that template, right? It's depicted inside of the resurrection story, right? In the resurrection story, it says that in the first night, Jesus descended into hell, for 3 days, and then he rose into the heavens on the third day. Right? So the archetype code is, why did he descend to hell before he went to heaven? Right? That really indicates that if you are wanting to go to great heights, you will need to go to great depths. There is no alternative, right?
Jesus didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And also the way that he alchemized, meaning, think about his story, right? He goes through 5 major betrayals. And what he does is he takes the betrayal, which is non-love, and he alchemizes it with love and forgiveness. He takes the betrayal that's non-love, he pours love and forgiveness and compassion. And he keeps doing that, right? So he's literally alchemizing essentially that. And he goes as far as, like, when they spear him at the end, he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they've done." Right? Demonstrating the capacity of the human heart to forgive. And just like that, right, that's a template of how you break out of the construct of the matrix, right? Because like him, we are all equal to the task that we're given in consciousness. He was equal to his mission. You're equal to your mission. You're equal to, if you start to get a glimpse of what your mission is, then you have within you the capacity to complete it, right? And in order to complete it, you got to do what he did. Go to hell. Go into the traumas that you've experienced and go and alchemize those with love and forgiveness, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to accomplish is what he demonstrated. He demonstrated something that I call the great work. This is something like an ancient sort of understanding. And the great work is essentially any effort in the direction of spiritual liberation. Any effort made in the direction of curing the amnesia that the soul receives when it comes into the earth, right? To remember your divinity. And what they understood is there was no greater work than that, right? Because once you're able to achieve that, then you can literally be a conduit for God on the planet. Until you discover your own soul and your own divinity, you can't be the conduit, you know? And what he demonstrated is this concept that I talk about a lot. It's like, what you're really attempting to do is that you want to die before you die, so that when you die, you don't die.
And
you see that? And the only way to die is you got to go face your darkness.
You got to take the dive.
You got to take the dive.
You got to take the dive. So I want to bring it back a little bit, because we went super high level there, right?
Yeah,
and,
I know.
And for that's okay, because that's exactly what we want, because what I say, you know, in business, in the world of business, you know, you talk about how us as humans, we move through, and correct me if I'm wrong, through 3 different levels, right? We come from human levels of consciousness of survival, service, and surrender. We could do business from these 3 different places. And I think that in order to get there, if I remember right, I did the roundtable a couple months ago, but us as humans, I think the statistic was 95% of us are moving through unconsciousness, and 5% of us are actually moving through consciousness. So a lot of these people may be diving into, they may not even be conscious that they're dealing with so much trauma, so many things in their past, right?